Shakespeare's Macbeth, Act 1. As the play opens, Shakespeare does so in a dramatic fashion. The curtain opens and we see three witches gathered together. Thunder and lightning. The first witch says, "When shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain?" The second says, "When the hurly-burly's done, when the battle is lost and won." The third says, "That will be ere the set of sun. Where the place? Upon the heath, there to meet with Macbeth. I come, Grey Malkin," Paddock calls anon. "Fair is foul, and foul is fair. Hover through the fog and filthy air." The first scene is a short one, as we can see, and I think it's largely for effect. Shakespeare knew that his audience, and particularly King James, really liked supernatural elements, and they liked the drama of the thunder and the lightning, and of course the witches. In this scene, we see three witches gathered together, talking about when they're going to meet again, and they're clearly planning something for our title character, Macbeth. They say in their first scene that they will meet when the battle is done and when the storm is over. They will reconvene on the heath. And they end this scene with kind of an interesting little saying, which is going to turn out to be a major theme. They say, "Fair is foul and foul is fair. Hover through the fog and filthy air." Fair is foul and foul is fair. Well, if we think of fair meaning good and foul meaning bad, what they're really saying here is good is bad and bad is good. This introduces us to one of the first themes of this play, the idea that we are not going to be able to clearly see the difference between what is good and what is evil. Sometimes what appears to be good is actually evil, and what appears to be bad could actually be good. Act 1, Scene 2 brings us to the king, King Duncan. At the beginning of this play, Duncan is King of Scotland, but clearly there's a battle going on. There has been some problems in Scotland. It's been shaken with both civil strife and attacks from abroad. Currently, they are at war. And the king sees a bloody man approach, and he thinks that perhaps he can ask him about what's going on at the front. Duncan says, "What bloody man is that? He can report, as seemeth by his plight, of the revolt of the newest state." By that he means, who is that man who's bleeding? He can probably tell us what's going on in the war front. Malcolm, the king's son, says this, "This is the sergeant who, like a good and hardy soldier, fought against my captivity. Hail, brave friend. Say to the king the knowledge of the broil as thou didst leave it." So Malcolm says, this is the man who fought to save me from being taken captive. He greets him and says, "Tell my father what's going on in the battle when you left it." The captain says this, "Doubtful it stood, as two spent swimmers that do cling together and choke their art. The merciless Macdonald, worthy to be a rebel, for to that the multiplying villainies of nature do swarm upon him, from the western isles of kerns and gallowglasses is supplied. And fortune, on his damn quarrel smiling, showed like a rebel's whore." So here's a summary of what he said so far. The battle he describes as like two swimmers who are tired and are clinging to one another and thus going down. He then refers to this man called Macdonald, someone he says is merciless. Macdonald is a rebel, someone who tried to take over. And he's clearly quite a villain. He has been supplied in his battle by what we call the Western Isles of Kerns and Gallowglasses. He's probably referring to islands off the coast of Scotland. He then says, "But all's too weak for brave Macbeth, well he deserves his name. Disdaining fortune with his brandished steel, which smoked like bloody execution, Like valor's minion, carved out his passage until he faced the slave, which never shook hands nor bade farewell to him, until he unseamed him from the nave to the chops and fixed his head upon our battlements. So we find out that Macbeth went to battle against this villainous rebel, MacDonald. Now, what's important to remember, I think, is that Macbeth is a thane. He's the leader of his forces. He would have been on horseback, and the peasants would have all surrounded him to try to protect him. But Macbeth is clearly not only a good leader, but a formidable warrior. He gets down off of his horse, and the text tells us carves his way up to MacDonald. When he meets him, he stabs his sword in and unseams him from the nave to the chops, drives his sword into the navel and runs it up to his chin. Then, standard Scottish fashion, chops the head off, puts it on the battlements. That was something that they did back then to show their victory. Duncan hears this and he says, "Oh, valiant cousin, worthy gentleman." We can assume he's referring to Macbeth in that statement. The captain says, "And whence the sun gins its reflection, shipwrecking storms and direful thunders shake. So from that spring whence comfort seemed to come, discomfort swells. Mark, King of Scotland, mark. No sooner justice had, with valor armed, compelled these skipping kerns to trust their heels, but the Norwegian lord, surveying vantage with furbished arms and new supplies of men, began a fresh assault." It wasn't over. As soon as Macbeth had killed the rebel MacDonald, it looks like there was an attack on the other side from, they say, the Norwegian lord. We can assume he's talking about Norway. Norway has attacked them, and they start a fresh assault. Duncan says, "Dismayed not this our captains, Macbeth and Banquo?" And the captain replies, "Yes, as sparrow's eagle or hare the lion. If I say sooth, I must report they were as cannons double charged with double cracks. So they doubly redoubled strokes upon the foe. Except they meant to bathe in reeking wounds or memorize another Golgotha, I cannot tell, but I am faint, my gashes cry for help." Duncan says, "So well thy words become thee as thy wounds, they smack of honor both. Go, get him surgeons." So before this captain has to be carried away so his wounds can be tended to, he tells the story about how Macbeth killed MacDonald in this brave attack where he took matters into his own hands and got down and did the work himself. Then they were attacked by Norway, but even that did not dismay Macbeth. He just tried even harder. So, good news about Macbeth. He seems like he really has been a faithful, loyal warrior and thane. Duncan then says, "Who comes here?" Malcolm says, "It's the worthy thane of Ross." Now, Ross in this play is a thane, just like Macbeth, but Shakespeare seems to be using Ross for a particular purpose. He frequently comes with a message of some kind, and this is no exception. Lennox says of him, "What a haste looks through his eyes. So should he look that seems to speak things strange." Lennox is simply remarking, he looks like he's hurrying to come here, like he has something important to tell us. Ross greets them and kneels before them and says, "God save the king." Duncan says, "Whence came thou, worthy thane?" That means, where have you come from? Ross says, "From Fife, great king, where the Norwegian batters flout the sky and fan our people cold." So he says he's come from a place called Fife. That's a place in Scotland where Norway has kind of taken over. He then says this, "Norway himself, with terrible numbers, assisted by that most disloyal traitor, the Thane of Cawdor, began a dismal conflict, till that Bellona's bridegroom laughed in proof, confronted him with self-comparisons, point against point, rebellious arm against arm, curbing his lashed spirit, and, to conclude, the victory fell on us." So it's all worked out okay, apparently. Norway tried to attack, and they took over briefly the area of Fife. The Scottish forces were able to quell that attack, but what's most important in what Ross has told us right now has to do with the Thane of Cawdor. The Thane of Cawdor is one of Duncan's thanes. He's somebody who's supposed to be loyal to King Duncan. But the bad news that Ross has to tell King Duncan is that the Thane of Cawdor was assisting in that attack by Norway. He's a traitor. He's betrayed his country. Duncan says, regarding their victory, great happiness. And then Ross says, that's now Sweno, Norway's king, craves composition, nor would we deem him burial of his men until he disbursed at St. Colm's Inch $10,000 to our general use. Well, there was a price to war back in those days. You had to pay to get your bodies back. If you tried to attack a country and you lost men on foreign soil, if you wanted those bodies back to bury them in their homeland, you'd pay for it. But Duncan says this, no more that Thane of Cawdor shall deceive our bosom interest. Go, pronounce his death, and with his former title, greet Macbeth. Now that's a really important line. Go, pronounce his death, and with his former title, greet Macbeth. So the king has made a decision here. He's going to kill the traitor, the Thane of Cawdor, and he's going to give his title and his lands to Macbeth as a reward for Macbeth's bravery and loyalty in battle. Ross says, I'll see it done. And Duncan says, what he hath lost, noble Macbeth hath won. So we see here maybe even another demonstration of the idea that it's going to be hard to tell good from evil, because clearly King Duncan had his trust in the Thane of Cawdor. He thought he was a good guy. He turned out to betray him and be a traitor. So now King Duncan has put his confidence in Macbeth, because Macbeth has fought hard for him in battle and he's heard good news about him. We're going to do one more scene in this section, and that is scene 3. We're back with the witches. Remember, they were getting ready to meet with Macbeth. And in general, it's never good when witches are planning to meet with you. Shakespeare starts the scene out in kind of a funny way. He just shows the witches talking together about what they've been up to. And this apparently is what witches do in their free time. The first witch says, where hast thou been, sister? Killing swine. Sister, where thou? A sailor's wife had chestnuts in her lap, and munched and munched and munched. Give me, quoth I. Roint thee, witch, the rump-fed runyon cries. Her husband's to Aleppo gone, master of the Tiger, but in a sieve all thither sail, and like a rat without a tail. I'll do, and I'll do. I'll give thee a wind, thou art kind, and I another. I myself have all the other, and the very ports they blow, and the quarters that they know in the shipman's card. I'll drain him dry as hay. Sleep shall neither night nor day hang upon his penthouse lid. He shall live a man forbid. Weary 7 nights 9 times 9 shall he dwindle, peak, and pine. Though his bark cannot be lost, yet it shall be tempest-tossed. Look what I have. The second witch says, show me, show me. Here I have a pilot's thumb, racked as homeward he did come. A drum, Macbeth doth come. Now, before I go on a little further, I just want to make sure you understand the things that witches are doing in their spare time as they are awaiting the man that they are supposed to trick. First of all, the first witch says, what have you been doing? And she says, well, I've just been killing swine, just killing pigs for fun. The third witch says, where have you been? And the first one tells a story. She apparently saw a sailor's wife who was eating chestnuts, and she asked her for some, and the sailor's wife called her a rump-fed runyon, which witches do not like. And so the witch has decided to wreak her revenge, not on the woman, but on the woman's husband, who's a sailor. She is going to wreak havoc with his ship, keep him tempest-tossed, drain him dry as hay, meaning they're going to keep him out at sea for so long that they don't have any water supply left. Apparently, it's not within their power to actually sink the ship, because the witch says, though it cannot be lost, yet it shall be tempest-tossed. Her sisters agree to help her by giving her winds so that she can accomplish her revenge. And then right before Macbeth's arrival, the first witch says, "Oh, look, I have a pilot's thumb. I took it as he was coming home." Then a drum signifies Macbeth's arrival. So I guess what we're supposed to get from that is that witches are up to no good. This is what they've been doing in their spare time. What do they have in store for Macbeth? Before he comes, the witches gather in a circle and they dance and they sing this. The weird sisters, hand in hand, posters of the sea and land, thus to go about, thrice to thine and thrice to mine, and thrice again to make up nine. Peace, the charms wound up. At this point, Macbeth and Banquo, we haven't seen Banquo yet. Banquo is a friend of Macbeth's, another high-ranking person in the kingdom, maybe not quite as high as Macbeth, but a colleague of his. And Macbeth's first line echoes something that the witches said early in scene 1. "So fair and foul a day I have not seen." Now he's probably referring to the weather and says, geez, it's nice one minute, it's cloudy the next. I have never seen a day like this. But we can't help but notice the similarity to foul and fair, the idea that we will not be able to tell good from bad in this play. Banquo starts off by saying, "How far is it called to Forest?" And then he sees the witches. He says, "What are these? So withered and so wild in their attire that they look not like inhabitants of the earth, and yet are on it. Live you? Or are you aught that man may question? You seem to understand me, by each at once her choppy finger laying upon her skinny lips. You should be women, and yet your beards forbid me to interpret that you are so." Macbeth says, "Speak if you can, what are you?" And the witches greet him one at a time. The first one says, "Hail, Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Glamis." Now, it's definitely weird whenever a witch greets you, but what's not weird is Thane of Glamis is actually Macbeth's title. That's who he is. He is that Thane. The second one says, "Hail to Macbeth, Thane of Cawdor." And the third one says, "Hail to Macbeth that shalt be king hereafter." Now here's where it gets a little odd, because we know from the previous scene that King Duncan has just made Macbeth Thane of Cawdor, but he doesn't know that yet. And so when Macbeth hears that he's Thane of Cawdor, why would they greet him as Thane of Cawdor when he knows there already is a Thane of Cawdor? And then the third one says something even more interesting. "Hail Macbeth that shalt be king." Macbeth must act surprised, because Banquo says, "Good sir, why do you start and seem to fear things that do sound so fair? In the name of truth," he says to the witches, "are you fantastical? Or that indeed which outwardly you show? My noble partner, you greet with present grace and great prediction of noble having and of royal hope, that he seems rapt withal. To me you speak not. If you can look into the seeds of time and say which grain will grow and which will not, speak then to me, who neither beg nor fear your favors or your hate." So Banquo says, "If you really can tell what's going to happen in the future, tell me what's in my future." And the witches say, "Hail, hail, hail." The first one says, "Lesser than Macbeth, but greater." The second one says, "Not so happy, yet much happier." And the third one says, "Thou shalt get kings, though thou be none. So all hail Macbeth and Banquo. Banquo and Macbeth, all hail." Now, it's very confusing what the witches predicted for Banquo. The first two things are not clear. You'll be lesser than Macbeth, but greater. You'll be happier, yet not so happy. But the third one has a more concrete explanation. They tell Banquo, "You will get kings, though thou will be none." What that means is Banquo's sons or his descendants will be king, though he will not be. So both of those prophecies seem pretty positive for these two guys. But then the witches do as witches do. They just disappear into the air before they can ask them more. And Macbeth says, "Stay, you imperfect speakers, tell me more. By Sinel's death, I know I'm Thane of Glamis." He says, "When my father, Sinel, died, I know I became Thane of Glamis. But how of Cawdor? The Thane of Cawdor lives, a prosperous gentleman, and to be king stands not within the prospect of belief, no more than to be Cawdor. Say from whence you owe this strange intelligence, or why upon this blasted heath you stop our way with such prophetic greeting. Speak, I charge you. But the witches vanish in the air. He wants to ask them more questions. Why are you calling me the Thane of Cawdor, and why are you calling me king? But they're gone. And Banquo says, the earth hath bubbles, as the water has, and these are of them. Whither are they vanished? Where did they go, he says. And Macbeth says, into the air. And what seemed corporal melted as breath into the wind. Would they had stayed. They're both regretting the fact that the witches have just vanished into the air. They wish they would have stayed so they could ask them more questions. And then Banquo says, were such things here as we do speak about, or have we eaten on the insane root that takes reason prisoner? Basically, that translates to, did that just happen, or are we on some kind of a drug? Macbeth says to him, your children shall be king. And Banquo says, you shall be king. And Thane of Cawdor too, went it not so? Macbeth says. And Banquo says, to the selfsame tune and words. Who's there? So as they're talking about this, they hear the approach of two men. One of them is Ross. And we know, like I told you, Ross is like a messenger. Remember that Ross just came from King Duncan. And what did Duncan tell him? He said, go pronounce the death of the Thane of Cawdor and greet Macbeth with the Thane of Cawdor's titles. So Ross comes and says, the king hath happily received, Macbeth, the news of thy success. And when he reads thy personal venture in the rebels' fight, his wonders and his praises do contend which should be thine or his. Silenced with that, and viewing over the rest of the selfsame day, he finds thee in the stout Norwegian ranks, nothing afeard of what thyself did make strange images of death. As thick as tale came post with post, and everyone did bear thy praises in his kingdom's great defense, and poured them down before him. So basically, Ross says, the king has heard what amazing job you've done in battle. Everybody has been talking about you. Angus says, we're sent to give thee from our royal father thanks, only to herald thee into a sight, not pay thee. Now, it would have been standard probably for a king to give payment, a reward, to someone who had done such a great job in battle as Macbeth has done. So Angus tells him, we don't have any money for you, but we're supposed to bring you to him. He wants to see you. And then Ross says, and for an earnest of greater honor, he bade me from him call thee Thane of Cawdor, in which addition, hail, most worthy Thane, for it is thine. Oh, there you go. In that line, Ross just told him, oh, also, he wanted us to tell you that you are Thane of Cawdor. Well, the witch's trap has been sprung, because there were two prophecies really for Macbeth, that he will be Thane of Cawdor and that he will be king. Now the first one has come true. So right away, Macbeth will naturally think, maybe the next one will too. Maybe I'll get to be king. He's shocked. And he says, what? Can the devil speak true? That's actually Macbeth's line. Forgive me. Banquo's line. Macbeth says, the Thane of Cawdor lives. Why do you dress me in borrowed robes? Meaning, explain yourself. There is a Thane of Cawdor. Why are you calling me Thane of Cawdor? Angus says, who was the Thane lives yet, but under heavy judgment bears that life which he deserves to lose. Whether he was combined with those of Norway, or did line the rebel with hidden help or vantage, or that with both he labored in his country's wrack, I know not, but treason's capital confessed and proved have overthrown him. So he tells him what happened, that the Thane of Cawdor was a traitor. And in an aside, and remember, an aside is when the actor will say something that the rest of the actors on the stage pretend they don't hear. It's like as if you had access to the character's thoughts. Macbeth says, Glamis and Thane of Cawdor, the greatest is behind. He probably means the greater part of the prophecy has already been accomplished. What's going to happen now? He then says, thank you for your pains, and turns privately to Banquo and says, do you not hope your children shall be kings, when those that gave the Thane of Cawdor to me promised no less to them? And Banquo says, though that, trust at home, might yet enkindle you under the throne, besides the Thane of Cawdor. So the two men are talking about the prophecy, how part of it is coming true, maybe they can hope for the others. But then Banquo cautions him about this. He says, but 'tis strange, and oftentimes to win us to our harm, the instruments of darkness tell us truths. Win us with honest trifles to betray us in deepest consequence. Cousins, a word I pray you. Banquo seems to understand that sometimes the instruments of darkness, the witches, will tell us something true to win us into their confidence and then betray us in the end. Once they're gone, or stepped aside, I should say, Macbeth says this to himself. Two truths are told as happy prologues to the swelling act of the imperial theme. I thank you, gentlemen. He says, this supernatural soliciting cannot be ill, cannot be good. That should remind you of that fair is foul, foul and fair language. What he's saying is, I don't know if what just happened is good or bad. If ill, if bad, why hath it given me earnest of success commencing in a truth? I am Thane of Cotter. If good, why do I yield to that suggestion whose horrid image doth unfix my hair and make my seated heart knock at my ribs against the use of nature? Present fears are less than horrible imaginings. My thought, whose murder is yet but fantastical, shakes so my single state of man that function is smothered in surmise and nothing is but what is not. In that aside, what Macbeth thought was, I don't know if this is good or bad. I can't say it's bad because it actually has rewarded me for my great job in battle. It made me Thane of Cotter. But I also can't say it's good, because if it was good, I wouldn't be having the thought that I'm having right now. What thought? Thought of murder. Because later on he says, my thought, whose murder is yet but fantastical, shakes so my single state of man. He means, I just had a thought of killing the king. He can't even believe he thought it. And as soon as he thought it, he put himself down. He says, I can't even believe it. He feels shaken that he even had that thought. Meanwhile, Banquo's looking at him, and Banquo says, look how our partner's rapt. And in another aside, Macbeth says, well, if chance will have me king, why, chance may crown me without my stir. By that, he means, if fate is destined to have me king, then it should happen without me having to do anything about it. Now, if he would have stayed right there, we wouldn't have had a play. Because in that moment, he's decided he's not going to do anything. He's just going to leave it to fate. Banquo says, new honors come upon him like our strange garments, cleave not to their mold, but with the aid of use. And Macbeth is still thinking. He thinks, come what come may, time and hour runs the roughest day. Banquo calls to him and says, worthy Macbeth, we stay upon your leisure. And Macbeth says, oh, give me your favor. My dull brain was wrought with things forgotten. He asked them to forgive him. His mind was wandering. Kind gentlemen, your pains are registered where every day I turn the leaf to read them. Let's toward the king. And then privately to his friend Banquo, he says, think upon what hath chanced, and at more time, the interim having weighed it, let us speak our free hearts, each to the other. And Banquo says, very gladly. And Macbeth says, until then, enough. Come, friends. So Macbeth wants to talk about what's happened with his friend Banquo. But right now, they're headed towards the king. And Macbeth seems to be headed right into the witch's trap.